afternoon all. As I said, my name is Mel. I am the head of social sector engagement at Big Society Capital. And this afternoon, we're going to take you through Let's Talk Good Finance, Food for Good. So a few bits and pieces in terms of housekeeping rules. It would be great, as I say, if you can change your name, not change your name, but update your Zoom profile if you can with your name and your organization. That just really helps. You also feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself if you want to say a little bit more about your organization. We are going to have 3 speakers join us today. So we've got Rene from Foodworks, we've got Yvonne from the Clink, and we also will have Watkiss from Homebaked shortly. She's just going to be joining us shortly. The session today is designed to do a few things. So to give you a little bit of an overview about what social investment is, we get to the main event, which is the Hear from a Peer speakers. People don't really want to come and listen to me. They want to listen to the people that have done this. And the panel are here for your questions as well. So the other bit of housekeeping we always say is there are no stupid questions. Really, there are not. If you are sitting there thinking it, there is somebody else that is also thinking it. So you can do a range of things. You can write your questions in the chat. You can send them to me on a direct message in the chat if you would rather not ask it in an open forum. Or when we get to Q&A, you can just raise a virtual hand and I can invite you in to ask the question directly. Just a little bit else that you need to know. Yvonne has got to leave us a bit early today. So she's going to go first when doing the Hear from a Peer piece. But if you have got a question from Yvonne and you think that she might need to leave before we get to the Q&A, if you pop those in the chat, then Yvonne at least will get a chance to see them and she can either type some stuff back or we can follow up with them afterwards. At least it gives her an overview. We're going to be recording this session. That's the other thing I think I need to tell you. So please, I mean, it really helps us if you can keep your cameras on, particularly when we get to the interactive pieces. We will just spotlight the speakers so that it's perhaps less distracting and you can see what's going on. And we will make the recording available for anybody afterwards. If there is a reason you don't want to be in the recording, then please do feel free to turn your camera off. And as always, we will have asked this in advance, hopefully, but if you've got any other accessibility requirements, please do drop us a message in the chat. We can drop Olivia or Abdullah direct messages and we can take those things into consideration where possible. Team, have I forgotten anything? No? Okay, so I think we are good to go. Last time, I'm going to just quickly say this is please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you wish to. Please pop in your Zoom name, your name and organisation, because that really helps. But we're going to start by doing what we do at the beginning of every single one of these sessions that we have pretty much ever run. And I think we're well over 60 of these we have now run around the country and on different thematics. And we're going to use Mentimeter to ask you a couple of questions. So to use Menti, you might want to have a phone to hand, or if you've got another browser you can use. And what we're going to do is start with a couple of those questions. So we've got the Menti link that's been put into the post. So you can either just click on that link or you can go to menti.com and we'll give you the code that you can use. Abdullah's sharing screen today. Thank you very much, Abdullah. So we will have the opportunity to have a look at this Mentimeter. And I think we start by asking you, oh, yeah, you've got a QR code as well. So QR code, you can scan that. You can use the link in the chat, or you can go to menti.com and type in that 8-digit number. Multiple ways to get into Menti. If you are having any problems accessing Mentimeter, then can you just let us know and we'll hang fire. But when we get to sharing the screen with this on, we will be able to see how many people we've actually got in. So 20 of us online at the moment. So just give you pause for just a second. And then I think you probably should, if you're already in, be able to see the first question already on your screen, which if memory serves me right, it'll be asking you the question about rating your understanding of social investment at the current moment, okay? So as we sit here today, rate your current understanding of social investment, all right? So there's no right and wrong answer. This is 0 at one end with no knowledge to 10 with excellent knowledge. I'm liking the guess right now of what under what their knowledge of social investment is. looking really good. Looking really lovely. So yeah, if you just pop those in, Abdullah, you just scroll over to the right for me on your screen just so I can see how many people are actually in. Can't quite see a little button at the 8 people. Okay, great, lovely, thank you. So I'll hang on a minute because there's 22 people. Anybody that's joined recently should be able to find the link to Mentimeter, and what we're asking you to do is to rate your understanding of social investment. You can see already the little blue up and down sort of graph line that sits behind shows you that we've got quite a range of people, from those that are around about 3. Oh, the QR code links to a different set of questions, apparently, Olivia. You just popped in the chat. Okay, so I think probably better to use the link then. That's in the chat. So let's go with the link in the chat then, rather than anything else. Apologies for that. I'll try and sort that out. Quite sure why we're sending you somewhere else. But at the moment, the average knowledge is 6.8. It's only got 8 people logged in, maybe because of going to a different place. So just give it a second. Abdullah, is it any different on your screen? Is there a lag, or is it still 6.8 with 8 people logged in?
Still 6.8 with 8 people logged in.
Okay, okay. Let me just check the chat to see if there's any other issues. Yeah, James is got that now. Yeah. Everybody else okay? Anybody else struggling to get in or need any help or support? Because we have a second question in this set. So I'm just going to check if everybody's with us. Okay, so we got 15 now. Okay, so that's probably a bit more representative. Okay, so we're rating our understanding as a group at the moment at 5.9, but you can see that we've got spread all the way from sort of very low digits, 0 to 1, all the way right through to some people who've got excellent knowledge. So as a group at the moment, our collective understanding is about 5.9. That's a little bit higher actually than usually with these sorts of groups. It's just less than 5 is where that we normally stand, and we'll come back and revisit this at the end of our session. Please feel free, if you haven't already entered your vote into Menti, feel free to do so, because I'll ask Abdullah to update me if that changes later on. Let's move on to the second question we're going to ask you, which is why you've come. And this really helps us to get an understanding of what it is you want to get from today's event. It could be that you have a specific area that you want to explore. It could be something around I think we're having a few tech issues, aren't we? Not quite. So this could be around what it is that you do you want to stop sharing for a minute, or if you can't get it to move on to the next one, I'll explain what it is, and then we can perhaps work out what the issue is. So the second question we're going to ask you in a minute is why you've come today. So it's really good for you to just be able to tell us in a couple of words, is this about gaining general information? Do you have a specific area of insight that you want to know more about? Is there a specific question you have, or a particular piece of information that you're searching for? And that's what we're going to try and cover, so that we can try and make sure that we either get that through the peer panel speakers, or that I can come back to it. Do we think we fixed it, team? Or yeah? Okay. Okay. So, and I'm welcoming Sally Ann as well. She's just joined us. Who's our third speaker. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so what are you hoping to gain from today's session? A better understanding of how to fund place-based food strategies. Well, that's a good one. We'll maybe not be able to tackle all of that, but we can definitely look at some of the ways that that is happening. Any more? I don't know whether it's our tech that's slow or unusual, and then we come rolling through. How many people do we have logged in? So I don't know, 1 on this question. Please, if anybody has joined since, you can use the link that's in the chat. I'm feeling in a minute like Matt, give up with Menti. It always works normally very well. Not today. Yes, no, team? I think the answer not coming through as you've answered. Okay, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Refresh. Abdullah?
Abdullah, do you want to unshare for a second and I can share the...
Oh, there.
Perfect.
I think it's showing now.
Yeah, sorry, I think there's just a lag or delay. So, so some new contacts, more knowledge about social investment. Oh, to share with other organisations seeking funding. That's really interesting. Curious, looking at case studies to carve out some options to support our cohorts. Okay, that's a particular program. Better understanding of whether social investment is a right fit for us, or we're definitely going to be able to give you some of the tools to ask yourself that question. To be able to have sufficient knowledge as to whether to still call us to us on social investment. We love that one. So we often say that with many of the support organisations we work with, that generally we have quite good support networks around grant, but not necessarily around whether repayable finance is the right one. And then the general understanding about social investment, so getting more knowledge around how it fits into the bigger picture are things that we often get asked. So thank you very much for that. If there was anything you wanted to add that didn't come up in the Menti, feel free to drop me a message in the chat or to put it in the chat. There's also some stuff around networking. And if you just scroll down for me, it's real case studies, which we're definitely going to have. And Abdullah, if you just scroll down to the bottom for me. Okay, a bit about metrics and impact measurement. Maybe we might have to send you some more things around that. Oh, and I love this one. We're finished on this one. Overall, understanding the social advantages, especially the risks and the disadvantages, we definitely can have some honest conversations about the good bits, the bad bits, the challenging bits, and the questions you should ask. So great, that's a lovely place for us to start. Thank you, Abdullah. Okay, so I am going to give you a very whistle-stop tour on what the role of social investment is, what it is, what it isn't. And I hope that will very neatly dovetail into our speakers. And also, it probably will go some way to answer some of those questions that you just put into the Menti when we go to work. So let's start with, very importantly, what is social investment? Okay, so I always normally say there's the elephant we need to get out in the room. So let's be clear. Social investment is the use of repayable finance to help an organisation achieve its social purpose. What does that mean? It means it's money you're going to have to pay back, usually with interest. So it isn't grant. It is different to grant. It doesn't necessarily replace grant. It's not a substitute for income. The good news is that it does work whether you're in the Highlands of Scotland or you're on the south coast of Cornwall. It doesn't operate only when within one particular place or one particular demographic or one particular social issue area. Doesn't mean to say that all social investors do the same thing, but we will come to that later. Okay, so how it works, well, there's a whole range of ways that I can tell you about how social investment works. So it's definitely something where you need to have trading or some kind of income generation, and we'll talk about how you might do that. As a result of that trading or income generation, you will need to have some, we sometimes talk about surplus. I prefer profit because I think it's quite important that we understand that we are enterprises and we need to make some money. And we're also going to talk about where social investment sits alongside all the other toolbox in your tools in your financial toolbox. But I could talk about this for a long time. And I don't have long. So the very best way for us to do this is to watch this very short video animation.
Across the UK, charities and social enterprises like yours are tackling some of society's biggest problems. Maybe you've set up a coffee business to give people the skills to get back into work, or are running a nursery and using the profits to support local parents. Whatever your mission, you'll need money to help with cash flow, to grow your organisation, or to buy an asset like a new building. You might even need finance to kick-start your new venture. And that money could come from traditional grants or donations, or as a loan from your local bank. One option is to get that money from a social investor. That social investor could be an organisation or an individual, and you can borrow their money or offer them shares in your organisation. But what makes a social investor different? Well, they don't just want to see a return on their investment. They want to see their money being used for good, helping you to keep delivering your social mission. Sound good? To see if it's right for you, check out goodfinance.org.uk.
Lovely. Thank you, Abdullah. That's great. So I said we talk a little bit about your financial toolkit. And I also said we talk a little bit about what the main purposes of raising social investment might be for. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, and there'll be a whole lot of things that could sit underneath this. But generally, we say that what you might look to use social investment for sit in 4 main buckets or types. So it might help you to buy an asset. That could well be often be a building or land or something that borrowing money can be secured against. And secured basically means that there's an asset that could help to repay the loan if required. Maintaining cash flow. This is actually the largest reason that social enterprises and charities need to borrow money. Often it can help to do things like cash flow a contract or help you take on staff in advance of actually being able to see the income come in. Kickstart your organisation. You notice I didn't say startup. I'm not going to tell you that you can never raise investment for startup, but it's definitely more challenging, and it's often where grant works best, so that you can pilot or try your ideas out, and then it's easier once you've got at least some kind of market evidence and some test case to be able to go and borrow money. So it's definitely not a no, you can't ever, but it's more challenging to do it for a startup. And then to grow your work or to innovate. So it could be that you want to scale the amount of services you do, or it might be that you want to introduce a new service. And then again is where probably borrowing money might help you. And social investment is just another tool in your toolbox. So it sits alongside borrowing from traditional banks or social banks. It sits alongside grants, and then social investment is another tool. And your income could be driven by all of these sorts of things, from trading. It could be a mixture of donations and fundraising, contracts or payment by result, business to business, business to customer. We often find that social enterprise and charities have quite mixed economies of income. And it's very important to note that because of that mixed economy, you might actually use a combination of different tools to best suit your organisation. Okay, so 3 things that you really need to think about. You need to think about the purpose. What do you need it for? And again, there's that list of the things that we described. The reason we get you to think those things through is matched to the sorts of investors you might borrow the money from. So more on that to come. Repayment, you need to think about how you're going to pay the money back. Remember, this is not grant. So it is about creating social impact, but it's also about being able to return the capital. So you need to think about, where does your money come from? It could be through government, central, local government, business, contracts. It could be through rental income, membership fees, donations, trading, or, as I say, a mixed economy of those. And you also need to think about, importantly, what social impact you'll create. So what sort of activities and outcomes, who's going to benefit, and measuring and reporting. I'm probably going to talk more about evidence, because this isn't about necessarily generating a whole load of work. This is about you being able to be clear about what difference that the money you might borrow is going to make. And right at the bottom here is one of these myths that we like to bust, because I often get people say, well, when social investors lend money, are they sort of making profit out of other people's misfortune or misery? Well, actually, you have to remember that the vast majority of social enterprises and charities, social investors who are listed on Good Finance, are social enterprises or charities themselves. And this is definitely not about extracting profit from the sector we all seek to support. Okay, so now we're on to the different types of social investment. This is all quite high level, and you can find lots more about this on Good Finance, but we generally tend to have 2 different types of investment. We have debt, okay, which is sometimes expressed as a loan, and equity, which is sometimes expressed as shares. So debt essentially is when an organisation borrows the money, they need to pay it back over a period of time with interest, and the time period of which they're borrowing it over will vary depending on who they're borrowing it from. Equity can only actually receive investment depending on the particular governance structure you have. So if you're a community interest company limited by share, or if you're a community benefit society or industrial and providence society or registered society, you can use equity. But for many social enterprises and charities, you might not be able to. And this is where sometimes we get to talk about something called equity-like or quasi-equity. And it's another one of those jargon terms that we will bust shortly. There are 2 main ways of getting social investment. Can be from an organisation or institution, so people like specialist social investment firms or fund managers, like perhaps Big Issue Invest or Resonance. Social banks, for example, like Triodos or Charity Bank. And trusts and foundations, who, as well as giving grant money, also do investment. So potentially somebody like SB Fairburn, for example. The other option is you can actually raise investment from individuals, and for many small businesses who are not social enterprises and charities, their number one form of funding tends to come from friends and family. But there's a whole range of ways you can raise investment from individuals, and that can include things like community shares or crowdfunding or angel investors, maybe in this case, social angel investors. If you're not sure what an angel investor is, then think of Dragon's Den. It's that sort of individual comes and pitches, and then somebody with disposable assets looks to invest in something else. So we talked about who are the funders. I said, didn't I, that often we need to talk about a little bit more about where the money comes from. And on this little graph, you've got at one hand side, you've got financial return and traditional investment. So that would be for mainstream businesses. On the other side, you've got where actually just what we're looking for is a social return, and where the money probably comes from philanthropic sources, so it doesn't have to be repaid. And then you've got everything in between, and social investment sits right in the middle. So who are the funders? You have individual investors, social banks, social investment fund managers, and potentially trusts and foundations. So a whole range of people. It's very important to remember not all social investors lend the same type of money. So I'll come on to talk about that. Okay, so the role of good finance, and we hope you're going to use this a lot more after today. This aims to be the single trusted source of information on social investment for charities and social enterprises. It's there to help you navigate your way through lots of different things that change on a regular basis. We are quite clear and understand you've got a lot to do in just running your organisation. This is not your primary thing, so we need to make it as easy as possible. We want to make sure that, and there are a couple of people who said they would come on because they want to be able to help people do better signposting or understand if it's right for organisations they work with. We want to make sure that all social enterprises and charities are able to make informed decisions around whether social investment is right for them. And then thirdly, and this is really important, we want to make sure that social enterprises and charities understand the difference between which investors do what, so that they can best connect to the investors that can suit them with the types of products they need, and also find one whose values they share, because this type of lending tends to be long-term relationships. So that's really important too. Okay. We have a number of online resources, which throughout today you'll find. So the Fund Mapper does help you find out who invests where you are. You can search that tool by geography or the amount of money you want to borrow or the social issue area that you're based in. You can have a look if you want to know more about the cost of capital. I usually get somebody ask me a question around how much it costs. And the cost of capital calculator helps you to work that out a little bit more and explains more. There's another great animation that talks about where money comes from and how that needs to be calculated into what it costs. There's a jargon buster. I said there's all sorts of myths, isn't there? I talked about quasi equity. Sounds like crazy equity to me. But essentially, that's where an organisation wants money that looks like equity, like the sort of Dragon's Den money. I'll give you X amount of money for X amount of shares, which is usually very long-term and patient, but also very high risk. And what quasi equity, sometimes known as revenue participation or equity-like, all of these tools you can find in our jargon buster, are basically it's talking about a way of lending money that is very patient and actually sort of shares the risk. So we'll talk more about that in the jargon buster. Is it right for us tool? Lots of you asked about whether it's going to be right for you. So my key thing that I would say is go away and have a look at the Is It Right For Us tool, and it will tell you whether, based on the information that you've put in, it thinks social investment might be worth you exploring more, either at this moment. If it says maybe not at this moment, it'll point you to some other resources. And even if it says no, not now, it won't say no, not ever. Definitely important to come back and revisit these questions as and when the circumstances of your organisation change.
I think I'll stop sharing my screen here.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you very much. Great stuff. Oh, and I'll have a look at some of the questions while I'm moving on. So that was a whistle-stop tour from me on what social investment is. I hope that's given you some framing. But I know that the very best part about the Let's Talk Good Finance is a bit where I'm not talking. So I'm really pleased that Rene, Yvonne and Zalia Ann are here this afternoon to talk about their experience. We always know that the Hear from Peers slots are the ones that you value the most. So we asked the peers to come along and talk about their experience, what their organisation does, how they've used investment. We asked them to tell their sort of warts and all story, so the good bits, the bad bits, the bits they didn't expect. We definitely want them to share their tips and advice. But the thing that really makes these sessions are your questions. So whilst the peers are speaking, you can do a couple of things. You can jot your questions down in the chat. Actually, if you have questions for Yvonne, please do that as she's speaking, because she's going to have to leave us a little bit early. If not, you can save them for the Q&A, but it helps to have a few in the bank because it takes you a little while to get warmed up, I know, and then you'll have so many questions, I won't be able to get them all in. Or if you want to ask a question but not in an open format, you can drop me a DM on the chat, or you can simply raise a virtual hand when we get to the Q&A session. So enough from me, and I'd just like to welcome Yvonne. She's going to be our first speaker from the Clink.
Thanks very much. So my name is Yvonne Thomas. I'm the Chief Executive of the Clink charity. So 2 minutes on what we do. We're a charity. We've been around for about 12 or 13 years. We train people primarily in prisons for the hospitality industry. So we operate in, as of today, 38 prisons. The charity has 2 trading subsidiaries, which is very material to the story I'm going to take you through. We have our Clink restaurants, which some of you may even have visited. So we have restaurants open to the public in 3 prisons, Brixton, Highdown and Style. And then we have a second trading subsidiary called Clink Events. That's run out of Downview Prison, and we service the City of London with a full service events business. So people in prison on any of our programmes are trained to City and Guilds MVQ level 2 or 3. We've just started offering apprenticeships. The Clink's mission is to reduce reoffending and to prevent offending. And we have found ourselves becoming increasingly aware of the fact that the demand for training places in prisons that we can offer, we can't supply, and that the post-release experience, where we actually have a support and mentoring arm that helps people into employment, was becoming more and more pressed and stretched. So we decided that we needed to do 2 things. We needed to increase our capacity for training, and we needed to be able to generate surplus to pay for the support and mentoring services. And this project that I'm going to talk to you about is how we are doing that and how we use social finance to hopefully achieve it. Just a word on how our income breaks down. We get revenue in from the events that we run on a commercial basis in the city. The Clink Events is a wholly owned subsidiary of the charity. It is a social enterprise, and 100% of the surpluses are reinvested in rehabilitation services. The second thing we do is we have a handful of contracts with the Ministry of Justice, and we run those on a strictly break-even basis. We then get donations and fundraising, like most charities. Our donations are very heavily skewed towards donations from corporates and people like the wonderful livery companies, etc. We get relatively small amounts from individuals. And then to that, we've now added social investment. So the project that we determined we wanted to go ahead with was to build a training kitchen outside of a prison in London so that we could not only train more people each year so they could come out of prison on temporary release, or they were coming out of prison and wanted to come into hospitality, or they were our own graduates who wanted to be trained to a higher level, such as a higher level apprenticeship. To do that, we decided that we would build a new training kitchen and also space for a purpose-built training room and space for our support and mentoring workers to meet our graduates and our students. we then needed to scope the project, and this is where it really got to be interesting. So in order for us to decide how much money we needed to raise, we needed to get quite specific about the project that we were going to put together. So what we decided to do was actually go out and see if somebody would grant us a sum of money that would be enough for us to employ enough professional advice, design advice, property search advice to get us off the ground. So we raised £50,000 from a brilliant individual who sort of got the whole investment world. And that was really important to what then happened next, because I didn't know whether we needed to raise £250,000 or £2 million. I really didn't know. I've never built a production kitchen, and I've never raised social investment before either. I come from a corporate world, so I'm not financially illiterate, but I've never done this before. So with our £50,000, we then retained somebody to do a property search. We went and saw loads and loads and loads of properties, and we identified premises that were perfect for our purposes in Herne Hill in South London. So that meant that we had selected somewhere that was, in transport terms, perfect for our London prison base, and was perfect for access to the city where our clients are. So we then started to get a grip of how much this thing would cost. So we're talking about a warehouse shell that needs to be turned into a food production kitchen and training facility. So we commissioned an independent design so that we would then be able, should we be able to raise the funding, to go to competitive procurement, so we owned our own design. So we had a property search advisor, and we had a production kitchen design company and their builders on board at this time. They got us to a stage whereby we could actually cost the project. And as it transpired, they came up with a costing of 1.1 million. And we thought, God, that sounds a lot for what we're trying to do here. It's a 6,400 square foot facility. And we therefore went around the houses a few times, and we all landed on a figure of 750k plus contingency was what we believe we needed to get this thing up and going. So we had to do our own kicking the tires and due diligence, because money's not easy to raise. It's just not. Ideally, I would have liked somebody to come and write a check out for £750,000 and say, there you go. But that doesn't happen very often. So we actually decided that we would try and raise at least 50% through grants and donations and 50% through social investment. We thought that would be a good balance for us. So the next thing we had to do was build a proper financial model to figure out how we paid back £375,000 and over what period we could afford to do it. Now, look, we're quite a small charity. We don't have these sorts of skills in-house. So we got someone to build the model for us. We're very good operationally, so we were able to, really tune that model. But that financial model became the whole basis of what then became a successful funding strategy. So we're now armed with a financial model and a set of designs and some premises. And of course, we want to enter into a 15-year lease. Well, we can't enter into the lease until we know the funding's in place. So we then started really playing very slow ball with the letting agents, etc., because this process has taken months. And having to juggle all of that has been quite interesting. We then started getting serious about the money, and we were very upfront with all of the people that we approached that we needed quite fast decisions. We explained the situation with the lease on the property, and so we were very transparent. We shared our financial model, We explained actually the cash flow coming out of it wasn't right yet because we had tuned it. So we just kept them with us every step of the way. But we didn't really know any social investment people. And our normal grant funders had already supported us in the previous 12 to 18 months. So we probably played them out a bit. So we had to find some new people. And this is where I thought the social investment world became very interesting. We were introduced to one of the large charitable foundations, and we went through their grant process, and they were the first to step up with a significant amount of money. So we got one grant for £250,000. And the reason we got that grant was that they were incredibly impressed with the quality of the financial model, the planning, the predicted outcomes, which we had based on our known outcomes from previous years and extrapolated. So the evidence started to become really important now. And also we were able to bring former students who are now graduates working in the industry to advocate for us. So we got one lump, and all of a sudden we are a third of the way in one hit, which was fantastic. The rest of it wasn't quite, well, that wasn't easy, but the rest of it wasn't quite so easy. We were introduced to a social investor via a mutual business acquaintance, and they proved to be gold dust, because whilst they couldn't fund everything that we wanted, it was way above most people's limits, because we're now trying to raise £500,000. They had a fantastic network of other social investors to whom they very happily introduced us. So what we've ended up with is 4 grants, 3 loans, and 1 revenue participation agreement. And the total of those is 750 plus contingency, so it's 825. We are about 45% grant, 55% social investment, so slightly different from the balance that we expected. I think the things that we've learned through this, certainly I've learned, was that initial money. I can't emphasize enough that putting that right up front, that initial investment or initial time and skill, if you can get it for free, was utterly critical to the ongoing success. The second thing was, not all social investment is inexpensive. And I mean, typically we've ended up paying about 5% per annum, which in market terms is great, but for a charity, it's still quite a lot of money. And what we did find is that because the social investors all want to know about each other, because they're co-investing effectively in a new venture, and therefore everyone's got to be really transparent about that, and they all coalesced on their terms. So all of a sudden we're getting offered 5% by everybody in the same term, which was very interesting, because I hadn't sort of wanted that really, but it is the way it is. All of them have offered us either an interest-free payment of 12 months or an interest in capital holiday of 12 months. The revenue participation agreement is really interesting. Because of the nature of the social enterprise that we run, we will probably pay that RPA back in about 3 years, at which point it's very expensive, because the way the RPA works is you pay a percentage of your turnover. If you don't hit the predicted turnover, you don't pay the percentage and you take longer to pay it back. And it's capped at 120% of the capital. So if you pay the thing back over 3 years, actually it's become really expensive money. So again, you know, if we had a pecking order of which debt do we want to get rid of first, that would actually be the first we'd want to get rid of. So you've got to bear that stuff in mind as well. In order to do this, bearing in mind that at any point we could have lost the property because we hadn't signed the lease, and therefore we would have had a useless design that we'd spent money on. So to do this, you've got to have a very understanding funder who understands your initial risk. You've got to have a really, really good board who get what what we're all trying to do. So the risk appetite around this and the board's understanding of these types of projects was quite critical. I'm really lucky. We've got a very commercially orientated board. As I said, I come from a sort of corporate background, so it was okay for us. It's still, it's an edgy thing to do. So we now have our money in place. We now have our project management and architects on board. We have our lease literally about to sign, and we have our orders in for all of our equipment, fit out costs, etc. And we expect to be in and cooking and training by the end of April. And that's great. The really important thing for us is that we expect to be able to help about an additional 50 people a year forever. This thing will need no grants in the future. And I think this is a really important point, that we weren't prepared to take investment if it wasn't effectively an investable business, which meant that at some point, not only does it have to wash its own face, but the secondary purpose was to generate surplus for the charity to pay for our support and mentoring services. And that is really important to us. So that's the only basis on which we would have borrowed this level of money, that, we don't grow for the sake of it. And yes, we want to help more people, but we also need to be a sustainable charity. And we felt this was an absolutely fantastic opportunity to make money for the charity and do more good. And happily, quite a lot of the social investors and grantors seem to have agreed with us. So really, that's probably about
Lovely.
all I've got to say, really.
Yeah, thank you, Yvonne. I've known of the Clink for a long time, and I mean, it was great hearing your story. I mean, probably the thing I should say, and it will be great because I know we've got Rene and we've got Sally Ann from Homebaked coming on next. Yours is probably not where most people start. So the average first-time borrowing is around £50,000, and I'm sure for anybody sitting on the call, it does take some, whether it's 50,000 or in your case 825,000. And actually, again, what's not untypical is the fact that you've got a range of different investors. We perhaps, I'm sure, might have some different questions around that investing at the same level. That's, again, probably not surprising. There's probably some stuff to unpick around that. And also we can talk a little bit more about the sort of, you've been really clear about the importance of that additional support you got at the beginning, which I think when you're raising 825,000, you can see. And also there's an added layer of complexity when you're trying to buy or lease property in London, because it tends to go so quickly. So I'm not saying it would not be relevant in other places, but has an added level of how much time you actually have to get these deals done. But there were so many things that you said in there, from the support level to being really clear and being able to articulate why you took the money. That's something people ask all the time. Is it worth it? Melanie, you've said it's worth it because we can have 50 more people forever sustainably going forward. So there's lots of questions that you answered there. So structures of charity. So there's a couple of questions.
Mel, the structural question's really interesting. It's something I didn't mention. Right, so the way our corporate structure works at the moment is we've got the charity is the main entity, but the charity only has one employee, and that's the co-sec. And then we've got the two trading arms. So we've got Clink Trading Limited and Clink Restaurants Limited, and both of those are subsidiaries of the charity. As part of this, and this, no matter if you're doing anything that's property based, this might be just worth thinking about. We wanted to qualify for business rates relief. And we also wanted to maximise our VAT position. At the moment, the charity is not in the VAT group. So we took a bit of specialist charity structuring advice using the money we've been given. And actually what we will be doing in January is we are merging the two trading entities into one. The lease and all of the equipment purchase, etc., will be in the name of the charity. And we are going to actually TUPE our employees into the charity as well. We didn't have to do all of that, but by doing it and therefore making absolutely sure that we pass the charitable purpose tests, which are, you know, some of that is arbitrary. We believe that we have maximised our taxation position, maximised our business rates position, and optimised our VAT position. And I mean, this, you know, all sounds a bit heavy and a bit complicated, but it's not really. It's common sense, to be honest. And you know, Mel, I get that, you know, raising 800,000 is a shed load of money actually, but it is the first time we've done it.
I was going to say,
We've never done anything like this before, so it can, you know, it's doable.
Yeah, no, definitely. But I mean, how long's the Clink been established for?
11 years.
11 years, and your turnover?
So we turn over top line 4 million, but 2 million of that is effectively break-even restaurant trading. So 2 million is grants, donations, contracts.
So I mean, you're right, it is. I mean, that it's a lot for a first-time raise, but it's also relative to some extent in terms of the size of your organisation and what you want to achieve. And the governance piece is, again, probably one of the most frequently asked questions we get, as in, what's the best type of governance structure? How does it impact? And I know that one of my colleagues in a minute be hot on the list and posting something in the chat around some support that we can provide for that. But it's been fascinating hearing that. If anybody have any other questions for Yvonne, she's around for another 10 minutes, so I might come back to her to have a quick look at those. And I'm sure we'll be following up with some case study, because I've definitely had the joy and pleasure of both eating Clink food and being served by Clink trained members of the team. So I would highly recommend that. But I think we're now moving over to, sorry, I've got Rene, you're coming up next. So thank you, Yvonne, brilliant. And as I say, keep an eye on the chat in case we get any more questions. But Rene, over to you. Let's now talk about FoodWorks.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Rene. Got a few slides. Let's see if that works. Over there, I reckon. So I'm just going to try and sort of tell the story of FoodWorks over the past year, which is sort of littered with different bits of social investment and what we've learned along the way, I suppose. So you know, we were set up in 2015 as the Real Junk Food Project Sheffield. That was inspired by part of a larger movement across the country of Real Junk Food projects, and we were the Sheffield version of that, inspired by a project that was set up in Leeds, which is called the Real Junk Food Project Leeds, obviously. So it was a food waste campaign, really. So campaigning against the excesses of sort of commercial food waste and the environmental and social injustice sort of related to that. And we set up as a social enterprise, which for us meant, I think it means a lot of different things to different people. So I'm not suggesting there was right or wrong answers there. I think it's important to clarify what that means to us. So being a social enterprise for us means that we are here only to serve a sort of a social purpose, right, to make an improvement in the world. But we feel that we want to do that in an entrepreneurial way. That the way we solve the problem is an entrepreneurial approach to solving that problem. That's really important to us. So we are fully not for profit, but we're not a charity. We are a business. We are just a not for profit business. So initially we were set as a food waste campaign for the first year or so. That was fully voluntary, and we picked up surplus food from businesses and we cooked with food and we fed people, and that grew very, very quickly. So within a couple of months we had over 50 volunteers involved, and we got to the point where either we well, we were sort of at the limits of what we could do with a fully voluntary sort of team. And so either we had to accept that Foodworks, or at the time the Real Junk Food Project Sheffield, would be a lovely story, but quantitatively not significant, I suppose. There's nothing wrong with that. That was an option. Or we needed to transition to an organization that had a very different sort of backbone infrastructure that included paid staff and stuff like that, and warehouses. And so we decided to take the leap to the second, and that's where our first sort of bit of social investment sort of starts. So in 2016, we started talking to Key Fund about social investment, and the reason we were talking about social investment is, I guess, twofold. On the one hand, because we weren't making a profit, no commercial bank was interested in considering sort of funding that operation, because that didn't make any sense. We also similarly found that it was really difficult to get any traction with grant funders. And that's really to do with the way that we measure our impact. It was interesting to see the question about impact. I might just take 2 minutes to segue into that, because it's actually something I care about a lot. So the way Foodworks works is we repurpose surplus food in lots of different ways. We run a social market, we cook with food, so we run community cafes. All of the food we supply is available on a pay-what-you-can basis, so people can make their own decisions about what they feel is fair, what they can afford, or what, but it doesn't really matter. That's their decision, it's not ours. The idea is that Foodworks is a commons, and that if everyone fairly contributes into the commons, everyone can take out of the commons what they need. And that means that even though a lot of the reasons we were set up to combat food waste were very sort of much inspired by an environmental mission, there was a value within our approach to solving that environmental problem, and that meant we felt it needed to be an inclusive solution. There's no point having a sustainable food system if it doesn't also feed everybody. And what that food system looks like is something that everyone needs to have a voice in, and not just people who can afford an organic veg box or an electric car. And so that meant that sort of, by virtue of having that value, we ended up feeding a lot of people that really struggled to responsibly, healthily feed themselves. And we had an enormous social impact, and we couldn't measure any of that because we felt it was completely inappropriate to ask people about why they came to Foodworks and to tell us about their financial trouble. And because we wanted to be a space where everyone felt respected and where everyone's treated with the same values and the same, so and actually the biggest impact I think we've always had is actually that. It's not necessarily feeding people, or it's creating a space where everyone can still be part of society and not feel stigmatized for whatever reason it is that they are there. But that also meant that most traditional grant funders really struggled with, fitting us into a pigeonhole of defining our impact. Tell us how many poor people you feed. I don't know. A lot, probably. I have no number, and I'm not going to give it you, because by the very act of measuring that, I would destroy the thing we've built. And I think that's so I'll leave it there, because I could go on forever about that. But think carefully about your impact measures. And also, I've got a physics background. That there is a law in physics that means there's nothing you can measure without affecting the thing you are measuring. And I think that's a really important thing to consider. Anyway, so we ended up with social investment because in Key Fund, we found a partner that was far less, was not necessarily looking for us to fit into pre-designed pigeonholes, either of funding output criteria or in terms of commercial sort of structure and like traditional approaches to business. We found a partner who was very much interested in listening to our story of how we wanted to make a difference and working with us to make that into a robust story. And that was really, really important. So we worked with them on a business plan, on a 3-year business plan that will allow us to transition to having a core of paid staff, to rent a warehouse and get all the food out of my living room. And we ended up having a loan grant combination of £40,000, repayable over 3 years. I think interest about £6 or so, but because it was a grant component to that, what it effectively means is we had an interest-free loan. So the grant component roughly paid for the interest. That really helped us get started at the time, but we also made a lot of mistakes in that sort of first phase. And there's a couple I'll highlight, and we can go into whatever's more interesting, I guess, when the Q&A comes up. One of the things we did is we assumed that the project that inspired us knew exactly what they were doing. And they said, we've got all business models for this, and all you have to do is copy it, and it's all sorted and done and dusted. And we trusted that that was the case, and it turned out to not really be the case. And we discovered lots of holes in badly designed business models after we'd already agreed the investment. And we had to do a lot of backpedaling and adjusting to sort of actually do our own homework properly, which we probably should have done in the first place. So the initial plan, which was sort of based around an educational program, which is what the picture relates to, that would generate funding that would basically cover the cost of all the other stuff that no one had quite figured out yet. That really didn't work. Because it's very easy on a spreadsheet to just imagine how many people would buy your randomly priced service, and it doesn't actually mean without any market research that that's going to happen. And it's very tempting, I think, to make a spreadsheet work by putting some slightly different numbers in, but it's very easy to fool yourself like that, and we did. So that led to investment round 2, which was a year later, and we were basically running out of runway, and we were trying to pivot into the business models that we developed ourselves, and sort of transitioning out of these business models that we'd inherited, but that didn't work. Our first attempt of doing that was to do catering. So we had community cafes, and we thought we could utilize these kitchens better by doing some commercial work. We started to get in a lot of requests to do sort of event catering, and we thought we could, rather than subsidize this with the program that we didn't feel worked, we could subsidize it with commercial catering work. So we got some money out to set it up, to hire a business development person and do some catering work. And that kept us going for quite a bit longer while we were making the transition of making all the other stuff work that we hadn't thought about enough in the first place. So then we had 2 bits of loans to repay. And I think the other thing that it was interesting to hear Yvonne link to this as well. Like I mentioned in the beginning, we're a non-for-profit business. And actually reflecting on all of this now, even though we necessarily didn't have a lot of options at the time, I don't actually think social investment was a terribly great idea for this particular sort of purpose, because we don't make a profit. And when you take out a loan, you need to catch up, right? You're trying to build and fund your own business. And then you also need to repay someone on top of that. That's hard enough when you're making a profit. And then when the whole thing you're designing is actually designed around not even making a profit, where is that going to come from? Where's that going to come from? So it didn't really, like, we sort of made it work, but it's really hard. And in hindsight, if we had other options, probably wouldn't have been the best vehicle to finance what we were trying to do. But the main thing for us is, and I'll get to that in the lessons later, like we did have a really good relationship with Key Fund, and we've always been very open with Key Fund about things that didn't work and what our approach was going to be to address that and to pivot. And they did develop a lot of confidence in our vision and our ability to work on this, even though we weren't where we needed to be. And that was really valuable, because ultimately everything is about relationships. And so we had a relationship with someone who believed in what we were doing and was willing to stick it out with us. And in a way that was probably worth more than the exact nature of the investment vehicle, I guess. But yeah, if I had options in hindsight, this probably wasn't the right choice. We did manage to pivot out of that situation by doing a lot of iterative work around all our business models, and sort of over the course of sort of 4 years or so, managed to make that all work. As one of the few organizations actually in this national chain of real junk food projects, they pretty much all went bust shortly after another, bar maybe 3 or 4 out of, I think, 120. And we got to the point where we actually very confident in the things we built ourselves, sort of growing out of this real junk food project sort of endeavor. And we sort of fully emerged from that in 2019 and rebranded as Foodworks. We wanted to be our own thing because we built our own models, and yeah, it was sort of a bit of a restart, I suppose. We did some crowdfunding for the restart, which is, I guess, social investment, although I've not really included it in this presentation. The main thing about crowdfunding, just as a tip, I guess, is it sounds like a really easy thing to do. It's actually really hard work. And to do it well requires a hell of a lot of preparation. And if you don't have at least half of your contributions sorted before you even start, you probably shouldn't. I'll leave it at that for now. So we set up we rebranded into Foodworks, and that's actually when we started to, for the first time, really develop a confident approach to sort of our own growth and our own delivery. And the first successful part of that was actually a contract we got from DEFRA. It's quite a funny story, actually. DEFRA published a tender for removing barriers to redistribution of surplus food in commercial businesses. It was an absolutely terrible tender, and it made all the wrong assumptions about the problem of food waste. I won't bore you with the details. But one night over a lot of beers, my colleague from Manchester and I decided to write a proposal that basically was a polite way of saying this tender sucks, pardon my French, and you have got it all wrong, but this is how we would do it. And then we would assume to get rejected. And we would campaign off the back of that rejection and sort of against, the failures of government policies and all that sort of thing. And actually turned out that we were the only organization in the country that got the tender awarded without having to make any amendments, which was really great on the one hand. It also meant now all of a sudden we had to do all of this. So that was interesting. And also they then told us, oh, by the way, at the time we probably had a turnover of maybe like 125, sort of 150,000 pounds. It was a 75,000 pound contract. And they said, by the way, this is funded quarterly in arrears. So that was fun, because we clearly couldn't cough up 3 months worth of finance to wait for a payment in a sort of government bureaucratic process to be funded afterwards for all that sort of delivery. So we were in a real pickle because we had a really exciting contract that could really turn the organization around. And now this really stupid thing of funding this quarterly in arrears was really going to make that impossible. And that's where our good relationship with Key Fund came in really clutch, because we talked to Key Fund about this problem and said, look, we've got a contract that is quarterly in arrears, we can't fund it, but like the money's coming, but I need money and I need it in the next 3 weeks, otherwise I'm going to have to reject this contract. And they were fantastic, because we had worked with them for 4 years and they absolutely believed in what we were doing and our ability to do this. And so they made it work. And so they took 2 weeks to give us 50K as a cash flow provision to deliver this contract. And that was the best use of social investment for us, because that was for a very different purpose, right? When we looked earlier at sort of the different reasons to do social investment, so cash flow is one of them. This was just strictly a cash flow issue. So that was fantastic, and this is where the relationship just really paid off, 1,000-fold. So we delivered this contract for DEFRA, and towards the end of that, we got right into the pandemic. And the pandemic was a really transformational period for us in many ways. So let's get into that, the pandemic pivot. So when the pandemic hit, as a food business, obviously had a massive impact. We built up a bit of a catering business, which was propping up a lot of the other things that we were doing to some extent. We couldn't do that anymore. All the catering got mothballed. We had to close our cafes. And so that was a real substantial part of what we were doing. And one of the things that was unique about Foodworks, that compared to other organizations that work with surplus food, is that we upcycle. We don't redistribute food, we cook with it and we add value to it. And it's a real important part of our business as well, right? The reason we get money for what we do is because we add value to the thing to the food that we pick up. It's a business principle. So we wanted to continue finding some way to cook with food, and so we started to do ready meals, because we could make this in a production kitchen. We could ship this out to homes, feeding people who were shielding or vulnerable, or for whatever other reason were struggling to feed themselves or go out to the shops. And that really took off in a fantastic way. And that the pandemic, in many ways, from a business point of view, has been the best thing that's ever happened to us, because it forced us to do a couple of things. It really got rid of a lot of things that we were running that, you know, spread everything way too thin, because we were always interested to do the other thing for a bit more impact or a bit more income, and you end up spreading yourself so thin and underestimating all the overheads, and you end up doing a lot of things not very well. And in the pandemic, we were forced to just simplify and actually do a few things. But the main thing that I really like about what happened over the pandemic is the catering was always a fun thing to do, and it brought us some income, but it had no social impact. It was a commercial thing to do, and it was a bit awkward because we weren't about that. It felt like a bit of a cheat to say, let's just do this little commercial thing on the side to plug the holes in the social stuff we haven't quite figured out to the degree that we need to. But the meals work on the same basis as all our other foods. People pay what they can afford. And so now we could utilize our kitchens for our community cafes in a way that, you know, still improved utilization. We could do all these meals alongside doing a cafe service, but they also had a social purpose rather than a commercial purpose. Oh, sorry. And we started growing some food as well. So the last investment that we've done with Key Fund is not really social investment, but it's the same relationship. So we coming out of COVID, had some match funding to invest in our kitchens and invest in our warehouse. Because we over COVID grew really, really fast. So we sort of doubled in size. And since we have again. So it was an investment, I guess, from a business point of view, but not a social investment from a, I don't know, from the mechanics of it, I suppose. So yeah, the lessons learned, I think, for me are, like I said at the beginning, I think social investment is a really collaborative process. And I really like that about it. You know, you're on the same team. You're not trying to hit someone else's hidden criteria or pigeonholes or whatever else. You're not playing games about what to disclose or not, because it doesn't work like that. And I really value, you know, being in it for the same thing, really. And I've always really felt that Key Fund and Foodworks have been in it for the same thing. We both want to make this work. And it's given us someone who believes in what we're doing, and you doing it, right? And that really changed when things get hard, and they will get hard probably. You've got all these plans, and then some of it doesn't quite work in the way that you think, and stuff's going to happen. And then having someone who believes in what you're doing and in your approach to doing it makes a massive difference. The thing we really didn't when we started, but we're much better at now, is to design to fail and learn. Like I said, nothing you will plan, and no business plan you write, no investment portfolio you put together, like none of it will happen. You know, it's a starting point, and then it will go very differently. And you need to design that whole process to allow for stuff to work out very differently, and to figure out as early as possible when it doesn't go as you plan. And to learn and adapt for it. That is the key part of the process. The plan in the beginning is immaterial. It's your ability to learn, I think, while you're executing. Focus. So I said already, like, I think we got spread way too thin, and we got way more successful when we were much more critical about choosing exactly which services and activities to deliver and which not to do. And then finally, reputation is everything. You know, everything we've ever done with any fund, social investment or not, or any collaboration with anyone, it's all about reputation. So being open about what you're good at, what you're not good at, why you're doing things. Like, you know, I have no time for playing games. I don't like it anyway, but I don't think it's effective. And the main reason we're successful now is because everyone in Sheffield believes in what we're doing and in us doing it. So right now we've got 500,000 turnover.
Maybe one more minute, okay, because I'm really conscious of time. So just one more minute.
Yeah, no worries. I'm pretty much done. We've got 100k reserves. We've got 0 debt. I don't need social investment anymore. I have reserves now. 14 staff, 300 volunteers, and every single part of the organization that we run doesn't really need subsidies anymore. It's pretty much all self-funding. So it's took us a while, but we're pretty much where we wanted to be a bit later, 8 years ago. That's me done.
Brilliant, lovely. Thank you, Rene. That's I mean, what a story, and also what a great example of different types of investment at different stages when you need it. I mean, I think your the way you framed your organization, you have very clear and very strong thought process around what you're here for and what works with your ethos and culture. I'm not necessarily going to say that I would frame them the same for every other organization. So on a personal note, I really hate not-for-profit because I tend to think it suggests to people that we'll do it for cheaper than market rate, or being paid less than somebody else, and I don't think that that's an acceptable part of our business model. You are right that, yeah, I'm sure most people would choose another form of financing. They didn't have to pay back with interest if it was available, but we all know that there's not enough grants to go round. But what you did say, which I think is really important that we hear lots, is about the relationship we have with your social investor. I hear this all the time from people. It's about more than the money. It's about finding somebody who shares your values, who's more like a trusted partner, an extension. And actually that came through, I think, in what Yvonne was saying, and also about patience. So I sometimes get asked, what makes a social investor social? And I usually say when the going gets tough, when things don't go according to plan, which is what happens. And I love the honesty about picking up the phone and having that kind of relationship. So I'm sure we're going to get some questions for you, Melanie, but let's script straight on to Sally Ann, because I know she's been waiting. She's got another great story to tell, and then we'll come back and we'll take some questions at the end. Keep those coming through in the chat. Over to you, Sally Ann. She's probably bored of seeing me, because we spent a lot of time here together yesterday as well.
Yeah. Seen a lot of each other over the last couple of days. Hi everyone, I'm Sally Ann Watkiss and I'm the chair of Homebaked Bakery. Homebaked Bakery is based in Anfield, just across from Liverpool's football stadium. It's been a bakery for over 100 years. As part of various issues, including expansion of the club and housing market renewal and various other things, the bakery closed, and a group of local residents took it over and formed a cooperative, which is Homebaked Bakery, and continued the tradition of baking bread in that building. We're famous for our pies, and our business model is based on 3 things: providing good quality food for the local community. Where the bakery is based is a fast food desert. It's basically pubs, betting shops and fast food shops that are open on match days and very little else. There's not easy access to supermarkets. There's not very much choice. To provide good quality jobs, it's an area of high deprivation. It's an area where there aren't flexible, accessible jobs. So that was always one of our aims. To provide training and support for the community, to help the community learn about good food, how to cook, how to prep food, how to bake your own bread, that sort of thing. And as a final thing, we are very much a place-based organisation. It's very much about being a presence on a street that we are surrounded by shops that are closed 340 days a year, and houses that are boarded up and derelict. And it's very much around providing a safe space for the community to gather and learn and eat and work together. we've been in existence for 10 years. And in that period, we've grown to a £500,000 turnover. We employ 20 people in good quality, real living wage jobs. Most of those 20 people were a long way from the job market before they joined us and came to us through volunteering, through our training programs, through various other ways that enabled us to support them to get back into the workplace. We still bake fresh bread every day, and it costs us money to bake fresh bread every day. So our business model is predicated on, we charge higher prices on match days to football supporters. That helps us support what we do keep our prices affordable during the week, and enable us to continue baking fresh bread. Pre-pandemic, we were a 90% traded income. So we're a trading business, and like Mel, we are a trading profit making business, but we don't actually make any profit because we spend most of it up the chain. But we are a very commercial business based on a really, really good product that enables us to deliver our social aims. We've had 3 lots of social investments over the years, of which the two are fairly recent. And our Live First Arc social investment goes back to 2017-18. When we first started, we were making our pies in the back of the shop. So if you can, for anybody that hasn't seen the shop, it's basically the end of a Victorian terrace. It's got a cafe and a shop in the front, and it's got a commercial cafe kitchen at the back with bread ovens, etc. We'd received some grant from Power to Change that enabled us to buy a big freezer and some batch cooking facilities, but we were still making our pies in the back of the shop. And what that was doing was it was making it very difficult to run the cafe and run the training that we were doing and everything else, because we were making, at that time, we were probably making about 1,500 pies a week. And that was a challenge in the space we had. So like some of our other, the other people that have spoken, getting grant for us has always been difficult because we are place-based. We don't work with a particular group of people. We work with the whole community. We are a very, very commercial, very successful business in our own right. So again, social investment was a better fit for us than getting a grant. So we approached First Arc, who were a local, and are now called Live, who are a local housing association who had an investment fund for £60,000, of which 45k was loan and 15k was grant. So that gave us some blended finance, which brought the interest rate down slightly. We received funding from the Reach Fund, which Liv supported us on, which enabled us to get our business models and give us some space to get ourselves ready. I'm an accountant by training, so producing business models was fine. But while I was doing that, I wasn't doing other things. So it was the Reach Fund helped us get our ducks in a row for the social investment. Whilst we were going through the process, we'd originally looked at thinking about reorganising the kitchen and how we could produce better with different shifts, etc. Whilst we were going through the process to get the funding, an opportunity arose to move into a purpose-built unit that had been used for food production and had some equipment that we could use. And to this day, it was serendipity. It was meant to happen. What the social investments allowed us to do was purchase the rest of the lease for that building and the equipment that was in it, and enabled us to move from being a slightly amateurish pie production operation in the back of our bakery into having a dedicated pie production unit. And that enabled us to double our production of pies, which then enabled us to have conversations with Liverpool Football Club and various other people around. Actually, we knew that we had a constant supply going forward. What was been really helpful with Liv and First Arc is that it isn't transactional. It is a relationship. They've supported us. They ask us questions. During the pandemic, they worked with us to reprofile our financing, all of that sort of thing. So it is very much around a relationship rather than just a transaction. Without that social investment, without that commitment from First Arc and that investment into our model, we wouldn't be where we are now. We couldn't do what we've done through grant funding or trading alone. We needed that investment to grow, and it's still paying. It's still paying off now. It's still giving us that capacity. We'll be paid off. Our loan will be paid off in January of this year. Unfortunately, we haven't got any reserves, but actually our trading income keeps us going, and that social investment has helped with that. Like the previous speaker, the pivot of COVID was a really big opportunity for us. We did lots of different things, baking bread for food banks. We did pies by pie deliveries to people's home addresses. We did school meals because we had a production kitchen. And we came out of the pandemic thinking that we were great. We've got a really, really great trading business. We've got a bit of reserves in place, and the cost of living impacted us really, really heavily. Because we have 2 large freezers and because we have bread ovens, etc., our electricity bill is £4,000 a month before we even start. Our ingredients went up, but we couldn't wholly pass that price on to our customers because we're in an area that's being impacted. Our football trade went down because lots of our regulars sold their season tickets on because they couldn't afford to keep them. So we were in a bit of a perfect storm, and we realised that actually to carry on our model, we needed to be more than 90% grant funded for a period. But as everybody knows, getting grant funding online, particularly when you're a trading business that isn't running projects, is actually running a business, can be quite difficult. So we have been successful with grants, but there was a really long lead time on it where we had a real cash flow working capital issue. And that's where Key Fund stepped in with their flexible finance product. And that's enabled us to get through that period of challenge. So that's a different type of social investment that we've used, that we found really, really useful as a trading business. It's much better and much more flexible than having an overdraft. So that was, we accessed 30,000. It's there in our bank account, helping us out when we need it, whilst we continue to grow our trading and access our grants for those elements of the business that are wholly grant dependent. We've always worked with Liverpool Football Club. During last year, Sodexo do the catering for Everton Football Club, and are part of the corporate challenge with Social Enterprise UK. So we built a relationship with Sodexo, who wanted to work with us, wanted to supply our pies both through Everton Football Club and through the Echo Arena. But to do that, we needed some more equipment. So we've taken on some more social finance with an organisation local to Liverpool City region, which is Kindred, and we basically got a 25k investment from them, which is interest free, but we've committed to repay it within 2 years so that our capital can go back to using somebody else. With that money, we bought the equipment that we needed to get into Everton, and we provided pies for the Labour Party conference in the arena. We provide pies now for their corporate lounges, and we've also got a concession in the Everton fan zone. So again, Kindred just gave us a bit of a step up to again take on additional business. And in our forecast for the next financial year is to be at a turnover of 650,000. So just that little bit of investment really has unlocked a lot of potential in our business, and it enables us to talk about our impact in a holistic way. What our social investors ask for is a whole thing. It's not, what are you doing with this group of poor people, or what are you doing with this group of disadvantaged people? It's actually, what are you doing to make your place a better place to live? What are you doing to contribute to the local economy and help our local economy become more resilient? So that's our social investment journey. It's always been positive for us. It was there, it's been there when we've needed it most, and it's underpinned the growth of our business, and it fits better with what we do than wholly grant income, because it recognises that actually we are a successful business in our own right. Just because we do business in a different way doesn't mean that we shouldn't be able to access things to help us grow.
Lovely. Thank you, Sally. Then that's absolutely brilliant. Just can you answer just one question for me? While I'm hoping people will get ready for questions, and Olivia or Abdullah will get us all into the panel ready for questions. Each bit of your social investment, just give us a ballpark figure. So you told us your turnover. The first bit from Liv was about how much?
It was 60k. But our turnover at that point was less than 300,000.
Okay, fine. That's brilliant. And then the second bit from Key Fund?
The Key Fund is 30k.
Okay. And then your last bit from Kindred?
25k.
Okay, I think it just really helps. I mean, we've had 3 fantastic examples here from a big first-time what I would call multi-fundraise, because you need, that's quite common actually, particularly for the larger amounts, when you have a mixture of different investors and some grant, particularly when you're doing asset-backed stuff, and then both for Foodworks and also for yourself, Sally Ann, then you've got a range of different types of investment. Difference being that Rene's borrowed it from one investor and you've used a range of different investors. Abdullah, can you pin Rene as well, please, into the thing, and then we'll do questions if that's okay. Lovely, thank you very much. Really interesting to hear your stories, and I've got some other things, and your honesty, I'm sure, will be really, really helpful to everybody that's in here. So I've got a couple of questions ready for you, but what normally happens is I'll start, and then usually people get brave and get carried away. So either, again, just a reminder, you can drop your questions into the chat, or actually you can just raise a virtual hand and I'll invite you in if you've got any questions for Sally Ann or for Rene. So you both in Homebaked and also in Foodworks example, actually, yeah, and it's quite interesting, you're framing your business models quite differently. There's nothing different. Oh, we got the one about cost. Yes, I knew somebody would do that for me. Thank you very much, Tamara, for bringing that in. Always, if you don't come in and ask it, then I normally would get to it. So brilliant. Okay, so what interest rate are you paying on loans? And this, I suppose I'm going to start off with a bit of context here is, you know, I will often get people say to me, well, the problem is, Mel, it's too expensive. And, I think it was, who was it? It was Yvonne, wasn't it, who said hers was 5%. And actually that's quite, I mean, hers will be secured, I would imagine, on at least, or some of it might be secured. Because actually, if that was unsecured lending, that would be at the bottom end. So I think it is really important to understand when you're talking about the cost of capital, that you are comparing apples with apples. So you can't compare the lending, for instance, on something like revenue participation that Yvonne was talking about against a secured loan from a social bank, which is like a mortgage effectively, because they take different types of risk. The capital comes from different types of places. They're designed to do different kinds of things and they cost different types of money. But it is really important to understand when you're looking at investment, firstly, what the range of investment like cost you are likely to pay for that type of product, because there's normally a sort of ballpark figure that you might pay. It's also really important you understand who else provides that kind of money so that potentially you can shop around and understand what's there. I really liked, again, I think it was Yvonne and Rene, you said this point about being really honest with your investor and making sure that you just tell them everything, that they would much rather that. It isn't about playing games, it's not about trading one investor off against another. But then it is also about understanding whether your business model will bear that cost. I suppose the bit that I would say is that no social investor, I'm confident this, no social investor will lend you the money if they think that'll break your business. Why would they? Yeah, that's not their aim to do so. So you might want it cheaper, wouldn't we all? But it does have some bearing on who's lending the money. I'm expecting there to be another question about cost in a minute. But Rene, you've put in yours, because yours was blended, wasn't it? Or at least one of yours was blended. So you had some grant in there as well.
Yeah, so the first three we had were blended. So the grant component was pretty much equal to the interest that would be repayable on the loan if we pay back in time, which we have. And then the grant had sort of social impacts outcomes defined against it to sort of justify the grant. Yeah.
Okay, great stuff. And Sally, and you talked about flexible finance, but you also talked about Kindred. Now, I'll get this one now because I'm sure I will get it later if not, which is, why can't we all have 0% interest loans? And when we all love them. But in this case, Kindred is a place-based investment fund where the money has been put up either by a grant provider, Power to Change, or by the Combined Authority or the Liverpool City region. So essentially, they're putting that money up for that type of investment. It's not coming from, say, a social bank where they are investing, putting other charity and social enterprises deposits. So it really does matter who's lending the money. And where their money comes from, because that has a direct impact on the sort of money that you've got. But the flexible finance one was also an interesting one. You said that was better for you than like a overdraft.
Yes, because it's a pretty good rate, and it worked for us. And again, Key Fund were very good and very supportive and understood our business model. We've also got a bounce back loan, because why wouldn't you have a bounce back? Why wouldn't you have a bounce back loan? Which is always a benefit of being a trading business as well as anything else. And we're paying that back as well. Unlike most people who seem to have bounce back loans who just aren't paying them.
I mean, that's another really good point. Actually, it enables me to pick up, Sally Ann, which is that we are not saying to anybody on this call that social investment is the only type of investment available to you. We are not telling you that borrowing money from a mainstream bank is bad. We are not telling you that you might not be able to get a different rate of interest from somebody. We will tell you to explore all options. You may well have the challenge. I think Rene said, that lots of mainstream banks just don't understand the business models of the organisations that we are it's fundamentally they don't always understand our values around why we do what we do. I would say that, you know, you have to trade off like the cost of investment versus either the relationship or the patience if things don't go according to plan. So, you know, I've got other examples of larger organisations that's borrowed a lot of money, and I know a housing-based organisation in the East Midlands, and they borrowed quite a large chunk of money from HSBC, but they borrowed a sizable chunk as well from Charity Bank. And when I asked them why, because they paid more money for the money that they borrowed from Charity Bank, they said they really wanted to have a partner by the side that if things got tough, they felt that there was somebody who would stick with them. Whereas I think they were less convinced that potentially the bank would win. And this thing about having investors co-investing, that's quite common practice in the social enterprise sector. If you're having a secured loan, a social bank will only be able to lend you a maximum of the total amount. It's called a loan to value. It's normally 60-40 or 70-30, and then you have to find the rest from somewhere else. If you've got reserves, you might put those forward. Sometimes you need to make sure you keep your reserves. If not, you might borrow that money from another investor. And it's quite common to see key fund or big issue invest working with a social bank, for instance. So again, Yvonne made this point really well, that social investors, they know each other really well, so they can't help you. They'll point you to somebody else that can. And of course, you can find a list of all the social investors on Good Finance in the Fund Mapper. Now, do I have any other questions from the audience? You have been quiet this afternoon, which is unusual. Anybody want to come off mute and ask a question or post something in the chat? No, I'm going to leave this long. Some great stories, I have to say. It's really interesting listening. Anybody else? We had some about legal structure, some about cost, but quite a lot about different types of lending and different types of products. Any other questions? No? Okay. Right, okay. So I'm just going to say thank you very much, Sally-Ann. Thank you very much, Rene, for joining us and sharing your experiences. It's always really interesting to hear. I am going to round us up in a minute with the last thing, but while I'm doing that, I'm just going to get you to think about a top tip you'd give the people on this call. So either something you've learned or a top tip you're saying, if you're thinking about looking at social investment, what would you do? What would you say? Sally-Ann.
Do you want me to go first?
Please.
I'd say be very, very clear about what you're using it for, and understanding both the social impact it will have, but also the commercial impact it'll have, because you've got to repay it. So actually, how is it going to help you grow your business? And it's that focus thing that Rene talked about previously. How is it going to help you grow your business, and therefore as a consequence grow your social impact? Because you're only in business for one reason, and that's your social impact. So it's making sure that you're using it to grow your business, to do the things that you set out to do. I think it's quite easy to use it to grow your business and miss some of your social aims.
Lovely, thank you, Sally-Ann. What about you, Rene? What would you say?
I'd probably go back to openness and honesty. These are a social investor is a partner that's going to collaborate with you on building your business, and that's how you should treat the relationship. And that means, you know, being transparent so they can help you where you need it.
Lovely, thank you very much. And lots more about legal structures. I've put a link. There's a really nice handy document on all the different legal structures and how they work. And then we do have the masterclass, which Libby's going to post an update on the website soon. Thank you.
Just a quick one from me. We're a cooperative.
Yeah.
So we're a co-op. We're owned by our members.
A community benefit society.
Yeah.
Great, lovely. Thank you very much. Okay.
An industrial, an IPS.
An IPS, Industrial Provident Society. Okay. Yeah. Great. Lovely. That's all covered on the link that I've just popped into the chat. Rene, I know you've got to go soon, so I'm just going to try and round us up. And thanks very much to our panel. I hope that you enjoyed that as much as I did. Few things for us to do. We've got a couple of case studies that we share. Abdullah, I think actually I've got time to just quickly talk people through those, just so you can see a couple of examples. And then I'm just going to go to our 7 lessons learned, which actually aren't our lessons as such. They are the lessons that people like Yvonne and Sally-Ann and Rene constantly tell us when we run these Let's Talk Good Finance sessions. So in front of you, you have Nemi Teas. So this is an organisation, a social enterprise, who produce their own tea and sell it here. The reason we put these case studies up to try and give you, again, a little bit more range over the types of organisation, size of organisation, types of money that they take. So this one was a blended finance product. You can see that at this stage, their turnover was only about 70,000, and they borrowed, if you like, almost like 75% of 50,000, sort of 3/4 against their turnover. They were paying 9.5% cost of capital. That will be for the loan rather than from, Rene talked about this, how a lot of social enterprises will think about like the compound rate of interest by bringing the grant in and costing out, how that sort of reduces the cost of capital overall. And it was 5 years. Most debt or loans tend to be fairly short term, so 3 to 5 years. Sometimes you might get them over 7 years. The next one we have is Miss Macaroon. Don't know if any of you have seen this, but Rosie bakes colour dyed panettone matched macaroons. You can buy them online, you can buy them through her retail units, you can buy them through corporate customers. And she borrowed money, again, this was quite in the early part of her business, from BCRS in the Midlands. You can see the cost of capital here was quite a lot more expensive. So this has happened over time. You get different types of offers, and depends on how you need need the money. That money will be probably fully repaid by now, because I think this one goes back to about 2018. And then finally we have, I think it is, yes, Cafe Van Gogh, which is a CIC. So this is borrowing money from Big Issue Invest. This is between 3 and 5 years. You usually find that with social investment, there isn't a penalty for repaying earlier, but you do always need to check that in the agreement, loan terms and agreement that you take on. You can see this bigger organisation, but actually the kind of smaller amount of money. So again, the average first-time borrowing is around £50,000 required, but actually you don't have to borrow that amount of money. And again, Sally-Ann was a really good example of different types of money at different times and different scales of money as well. We will share these afterwards. Lovely, thank you, Abdullah. We'll just move on to the final slide, which is, these are the lessons learned. And actually, I think Yvonne, Sally-Ann and Rene have covered so many of these already for us. So it is, social investment is not benevolent money. It is money you've got to pay back with interest. You do need to have a business model that will repay this. So, you know, Rene was really honest and says if he went back at the beginning, maybe he wouldn't have borrowed that kind of money. I think it's interesting. If he hadn't have borrowed that kind of money and hadn't got used to doing it, or had got grant, you wonder, you know, often takes that first loan to get you into the mindset or the discipline, but often it's because there isn't other money. But as Sally-Ann said, sometimes grant money isn't always the best money, because it doesn't allow you to do what you want to do in it. It doesn't direct you to certain outcomes, which often grant money will need you to do. Impact matters. Again, there were some great examples of this, from the 50 more people that we can train and support from the Clink to it's not about how many poor people we feed or how many underserved people we feed. It's all about how we work within our place, from Homebaked to actually it's about, you know, it's not being driven to measure what any one person wants you to measure. And that, I think Rene was very strong in his thoughts about how that might skew what you do. But it is about being able to explain how the difference that a social investor, what difference a social investor's money will make. So what are you going to use it for? So I have some great advice from Sally-Ann there. Think really clearly, what do you want to use it for? And think about what you're aiming to make that money do. And that doesn't have to be a book and a film. Okay, this does not have to be an expensive social impact report and glossy pages. This is about you explaining it and thinking afterwards how you will evidence it rather than measure it in reams of statistics. It's about much more than the money. I hear this all the time. So whether it is, I have known social investors to give capital repayment holidays, vary the terms of a loan. I think the most extreme case I've heard is 16 variations on a loan term. I'm not sure all social investors want that on every loan they made, but it just shows you the level of flexibility people are prepared to go to when things get difficult. I've also known people to go into contract negotiations, particularly around, Rene was talking about the cash flow piece, you know, being able to say, if you award this contract, we will lend the money for cash flow. Honesty is always the best policy. This is not about avoiding a phone call with your investor if you can't make the repayment this month, or if a third-party provider is late paying you, or if you're stuck in contract negotiations, or I don't know, you've lost your baker, or whatever this happens to be. Whatever problem you've got, you need to go and talk to your social investor. Honesty is definitely the best policy. And during COVID, I know that social investors spoke to every single person in their investment portfolio over the first few weeks, just to see, check how people were doing, because as everybody's described actually how much they had to pivot during that time. Why isn't it cheaper if it's social? I'm going to go back to that piece about it depends. It depends on whose money it is, where that money is coming from. Do you want it at the best price? Of course you do, because that enables you to create more social impact. It can't always be the cheapest type of money. It depends on the risk that money is taking, and whatever price you are paying at has to be equated across a whole portfolio, because sometimes businesses will fail, and sometimes, social investors won't get their money back and won't get it recycled. So there are different types of risk that a social bank can take. So you say a organisation that's lending philanthropic money, or where the money at root is grant, and where that money doesn't have to be returned. So that's different depending on which organisation it's quite important for you to understand where the money comes from. Due diligence isn't fun, but it does make your business better. There's probably one thing that didn't come up today, which is quite unusual. Again, we have a new piece of support coming out around due diligence and what that really looks like, because most people, if they've never been through it, don't know what it's like. I think if you're somebody that is embedded in the numbers, if you're somebody perhaps like Sally Ann, who come from accounts type background, you're expecting some of these questions. I know for many social enterprise and charities, they don't necessarily enjoy it, because it feels like additional work in terms of what you're there to do. But this is how a social investor gets comfortable whether lending you the money is the right thing to do. And what we do know is that for organisations that perhaps have been through due diligence but not necessarily been awarded the money, we still think it makes their organisation better for doing it. So do watch out on our channels soon for more information about what due diligence is like. We've actually managed to get behind that and talk to investors so you can get a sort of upfront view of what due diligence sorts of questions to get asked. And it always takes longer than you think. We had a fantastic example today, didn't we, of FoodWorks, when they had 3 weeks and they needed to turn that around. Social investment can be responsive. I usually say to people it probably doesn't operate best when your back is against the wall. I think there's some exceptions, for instance, during the cost of living crisis, which we've talked about, flexible finance, which is a sort of response from that, or during COVID, when we were looking at things like the Recovery Loan Fund. But generally, you need to think about when you're going to need the money and plan for it. And you also need to ask your investor to tell you, how often do their investment panels meet? Sometimes they meet monthly, sometimes they might not meet every 2 months. How quickly they can make a decision is based on how quickly you can get back to them with information. And it is possible to get quick turnarounds on decisions. But I've also known things, and probably the Clink is not an unusual example of things that take months, because there are, you're waiting for that lease to be signed, or you're waiting for a piece of legal information to come back as to whether anybody else has got a charge on that property before you can raise an investment against it. There's a whole range of different things that can hold up the process. So those are the lessons learned. That's what other peers have told us. I hope you've enjoyed this afternoon. I certainly have, learning about lots of 3 more organisations who've all used investment in a different way. I hope we've busted a few myths. I hope we've given you a few more tools on what social investment is. Going back to some of those questions right at the beginning, I hope those of you looking for more information on signposting, more general knowledge, have some of that. Those of you looking for maybe inspiration on different models on where you might raise investment, I hope we've given you some of that. Some of the stuff on impact, I think the speakers did a good job, but there are, again, more resources on our website that can help around particularly our outcomes matrix, which is a very popular tool that many organisations use. And lastly, right at the very beginning, I asked you to rate your knowledge, which I think we were at 5.9, which is slightly better. When you end this, we're going to have a very short survey that's going to come up. We're going to ask you to do that same exercise at the end, just asking you to rate your knowledge so that we can try and understand whether actually we're managing to add some value and help you sort of learn a little bit more about how social investment works. As always, the rest of the team and I are around. You'll have our information and details on the follow-up email that's coming. And if we can help in any other way, do feel free to come back to us. But other than that, check out Good Finance. Thanks to the speakers. You've all been amazing. And we'll catch you all again soon. Take care. Bye.